We begin again with breaking news as the war in Ukraine enters its 7th day. This morning, widespread destruction from Russian airstrikes in several key cities, including the capital of Kyiv. The UN says at least 136 civilians have been killed so far, but the real death toll is believed to be much higher. Officials in Ukraine are denying Russian state media reports that Russia has captured the key southern city of Kherson. U.S. defense officials say Russia's military progress has slowed, including a massive convoy heading toward Kyiv. In Washington, President Biden condemned Russia's invasion and pledged to support Ukraine in his State of the Union address, but reiterated that American troops would not be sent in to fight.
Together with our allies, we're providing support to the Ukrainians in their fight for freedom. Military assistance, economic assistance, humanitarian assistance. But let me be clear, our forces are not engaged and will not engage in the conflict with Russian forces in Ukraine.
That State of the Union address came just hours after a call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who told reporters yesterday talks with Russia can resume when the bombing stops and that Ukraine won't win this war without help.
Ukraine will fight. We'll fight more than anyone else, but we, just by ourselves, left alone against Russia, we simply cannot manage.
We have team coverage for you this morning with NBC News military analyst Colonel Jack Jacobs, NBC News senior international correspondent Keir Simmons in Moscow, and NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley in the western Ukrainian city of Lviv. Matt, let's start with you. Kyiv, a place you know well, is again in focus today following that heavy shelling we saw yesterday. Ukraine's military says Russian paratroopers landed in the city overnight. Are we about to see the start of a broader ground battle? What is the latest there?
Yeah, I mean, not only are we about to see the start of a broader ground battle, I think we're really about to see the start of a battle that puts civilians on the front line. And that's the really troubling thing, is that Vladimir Putin and his army have become increasingly frustrated. We're starting to hear, not necessarily in Kharkiv, though we are seeing signs, traces of that shift in the force arrangement. We're starting to see that also in Kyiv, where Vladimir Putin and Russia said that civilians should leave. This is the first time they actually announced that they were going to be targeting into civilian areas. Now, of course, already they've been hitting civilian targets, regardless of whether they announced it or not, even though they've been saying they've been mostly hitting military and strategic targets. We know that they've been striking civilians, especially in Kharkiv. But that's kind of the next foot to drop here, is that we're going to start to see, as this military becomes frustrated, that they're going to start moving into city centers, to residential areas. Because remember, guys, this was a military who thought that their overwhelming force and somewhat may have deluded themselves that sympathy on the ground for Moscow might have given them an easy victory. That has clearly not been the case, as we're now in day 7, and they have yet to take any seriously large areas of residential or sort of civilian-controlled areas. So now, frustrated, it seems as though they are literally bringing in the big guns. We were talking about that convoy of tanks and armored vehicles moving down towards Kyiv. Now it looks like it's getting serious in terms of civilian engagement. Guys?
Now, Matt, we're getting mixed reports out of the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson. Russia's defense ministry says it has captured the city, while the region's governor says the city is encircled by Russian forces. How much of a victory would it be for Russia if it has indeed, or does indeed, capture this city? Why is it so important?
Well, Kherson is the home of a major naval base, as in, all of those cities along the Black Sea are important assets. And frankly, as I was talking earlier about the Russian advance from the north, that's been really frustrated. But the Russian advance from the south has seen a lot more success. So we've seen major incursions into cities like Melitopol and Kherson, and also Berdyansk, which is now seen basically occupied entirely. And in fact, I believe the Ukrainians have essentially admitted that. We're starting to see videos out of Berdyansk where Ukrainian citizens are in the streets heckling Russian soldiers who are occupying that city and taking up positions in front of major points of political importance like city halls and things like that. So it would be important in the sense that it gives the Russians the upper hand in the naval battle in the south. But I got to tell you, Joe, the Russians have already made a lot of strides in the south, but that's only compared to the frustrations that they've experienced in the north of the country, around Kharkiv in the east and around Kyiv in the center north. So yes, those advances have been pretty swift, but only relative to the frustrations they've had in the north. Guys.
All right. Matt Bradley reporting from Lviv this morning. Matt, thank you so much.
This morning, we're also following the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Eastern Europe as Ukrainian refugees flee for safety. According to the UN, more than 660,000 Ukrainians have left the country since the Russian invasion began, and that number is expected to grow a lot. So far, most have crossed over into Poland. NBC News correspondent Jay Gray joins us from a busy train station in Poland where many of those Ukrainian refugees are arriving. Hi, Jay. Good morning. So first, just tell us about what you're seeing on the ground there, some of the stories of the people crossing over.
Yeah, absolutely, Savannah. And we're in Przemyśl, just 3, maybe 4 miles from the border. I want to give you a firsthand look. We've been given special permission by the Polish army to see the latest train that's come in from Kyiv, from the capital city. These people escaping what has been nonstop shelling in that city for the last 24 to 48 hours and rushing here to safety. 2,500 people stuffed onto that train. And obviously, with the situation going on there in Kyiv, there's no regular train schedule. People have waited for days to get onto this train and try and escape the violence there. Here's another big part of what's happening here, and you can see it. Donations continuing to pour in for those who are coming into this country from Ukraine. You've got food, you've got water, you've got clothing and blankets, the things that so many people need as they make the trip here. Look, many of them have only a backpack or a small bag that they've brought with them, and that's it. That's all they have as they come across the border here and try and figure out exactly what's going to go on next. So as they get off the train, I want to show you what happens next. You can see the line here, and that's because they're moving through customs, moving through security. They get their papers looked over here and then continue on the process. They move to another part of this train station where many are having to make the very difficult decision, guys, about where they go next, what they do next, and knowing for many of these families that they left someone behind.
Oh, absolutely, especially as we see those men of age to fight not be able to cross over the border and leave their families. Jay, I do want to ask you, I know many people don't know what's next, but a little bit more about that. I mean, Poland's deputy interior minister says about 100,000 refugees crossed over into Poland yesterday alone. They have to go somewhere once they leave that checkpoint. Tell us about the effort, whether it's volunteer, whether it's being provided by Poland to give housing, to give food even to all these people who have been, in many cases, in the cold, without food, walking for days.
Yeah, no, you're right, Savannah, and it's really a mixture of both. The outpouring's been unbelievable, and we've been to several border crossings in this area. Here's what I can tell you. As people come in, they're given a place to get a hot meal, get a shower at times. They're also told that they can kind of decide what city they want to go to in Poland so they can get on a train. And let's walk over and show you, since we're here, what's happened. And you can see people right now getting on a train. So they've left this train, they move over, they get on a separate train, and they head to another city in Poland, maybe Warsaw, maybe Krakow. And there they're given a place where they can stay, more of an apartment type atmosphere where they can really take a breath and figure out what they're going to do. What you also see in these areas are people that come in with signs saying, hey, I can take 6 people to my home. I can take 10 people across the border. I can go to Germany. I can go wherever. And so a lot of people just jumping in. I talked to a woman from Denmark yesterday, a doctor who said she was just compelled to get here. She had to be here and to help these people. She came with a friend, empty cars. They took 12 people back to Denmark to set them up, help them find jobs, and help them move forward.
Jay, I think so many people have just been wondering what is happening to these people. Where are they going? It's really incredible to actually see so much. Thank you for walking us around there. I now want to ask you a question that's actually the most frequent question I've been being asked on my social media from viewers, which is about these troubling reports of Africans being discriminated against, even abused in some cases at border crossings. What's going on there?
Yeah, and I've talked to a few people. Some have said that they've had rough experiences. Others have said it's a clean shot and they've been through. We have heard from the foreign minister today who says that, look, that's unacceptable, that everyone is deeply affected by what's happening in Ukraine, and they want to make sure that passage continues.
Jay, thank you so much. We so appreciate your reporting. Stay safe.
Let's cross over to Moscow now, where our senior international correspondent Kyiv Simmons is standing by. So, Kyiv, do we have any sense of the mood among the Russian leadership about the progress their military is making so far in Ukraine?
Well, we know that they're frustrated because we've heard that from sources in the US and in Western governments who are monitoring, and also because we can see the way that the Russians are changing their tactics. And I think that's clearly an expression of the frustration felt at the very top with President Putin. We did hear from Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, today responding to the State of the Union speech, and particularly to the claim by President Biden that the economy here is shaking. He says, and he admits, and this is interesting, that the Russian economy is now experiencing a serious blow, but he says there is a margin of safety and we will stay on our feet. Now, of course, as you can imagine, the State of the Union overnight, Russians didn't stay up overnight to watch, but you can also imagine that the 6,800 people who've been arrested for protesting, the more than 1 million who have signed petitions for peace, that those people, I suspect, would have liked to have seen President Biden devote the entire speech to the situation in Ukraine, to the battle between democracy and autocracy, and it was uncomfortable to watch as that speech segued into domestic politics, more traditional speech, and some stood up and some sat down, but that is democracy. And the difference, of course, is that in the West and in the US, you're allowed to have different opinions. Here, overnight, while that speech was happening, President Putin's government closing down an independent TV station, an independent radio station, threatening Wikipedia with Russian Wikipedia with closing it down simply because of its post about the invasion of Ukraine.
Here, let's talk more about President Biden's State of the Union last night. He took aim at Putin and Russia's oligarchs during that address. He said Putin underestimated the West's response. Do we have any clues as to whether pressure has been building on Putin from his inner circle or from Russian business leaders as a result of all these sanctions we've seen over the last week?
Well, the pressure is, you can see it in the statements that are being made by oligarchs, carefully calibrated. There are different kinds of oligarchs. There are oligarchs, and those, of course, are Russian billionaires. There are oligarchs who live primarily in Russia and others who live overseas. The idea that those people, though, can get close to President Putin, kind of talk him round, if you like, well, that's a fantasy. There is, of course, pressure on the country as a whole, and that, may have an effect over the long term. Here's the thing, though, that I think may have the most effect, and it isn't President Biden speaking to Congress, the American people, and the world on television, and maybe some of those comments reaching people here in Russia. Here's one of the things I think might have a real impact. Those sieges of the cities in Ukraine. The Russian people have the siege of a city seared into their historic memory. That was the siege of Leningrad, now St. Petersburg in the Second World War. 1.5 million people died. Now, if we start to see terrible scenes from those cities in Ukraine, well, then I think that may have an impact on public opinion here.
Kyiv, real quickly, I want to ask you, Russian media reports said that round 2 of ceasefire talks could come as early as today. Do we know if there's any progress on that front?
We do hear from the Russians that they say that their delegation to talk are ready and are getting ready. We don't know what the situation is with the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have said they want to see the bombing stop, the conflict stop before they talk again. But even in a war, contact can be helpful, even if to just deconflict in some places. So I suspect you will see talks at some stage.
All right. Kyiv Simmons reporting from Moscow. Kyiv, thank you.
Let's now bring in Colonel Jack Jacobs. He's an NBC News, MSNBC military analyst, and a Medal of Honor recipient. Colonel, thanks so much for being with us. So let's talk about what we're seeing in terms of a shifting military strategy here from Russia. First, Ukraine says Russia is specifically targeting civilians in these bombings. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told the UN Human Rights Council these attacks are hitting schools, hospitals, residential buildings. Experts are saying they're watching this shift to more brutal, unrestricted warfare. What does this tell you about where Putin's head is at right now? And what's your concern when you see that convoy headed for Kyiv, when you think about what the Russian military could be capable of if they were to be completely unrestricted in their warfare?
Well, the Russians convinced themselves that it would be an easy walkover, and of course that turned out not to be the case. Either the military told Putin that it was going to be easy and he believed it, or the military told Putin it wasn't going to be easy and he told him to shut up and get moving. In any case, it's not easy, and as a result, the Russians have, well, I guess they've resorted to tactics which they know better. Rather than being surgical, they've decided to be indiscriminate. It's unlikely that they're actually targeting these things. They're just throwing indirect fire wherever they can in order to make it easier for them to take control of the cities. And make no mistake about it, that's what they want to do. They have two principal strategic objectives with respect to this campaign. The first is to encircle the cities, particularly Kyiv, and lay siege to them, prevent any Ukrainians from leaving. And second, to have their forces that are coming from the north link up with those coming from the south and isolate the Ukrainian army and make it impossible for the Ukrainian army to fight back. That's most concerning, because if they manage to do the latter, we won't be able to resupply the Ukrainians.
Also, it's so concerning to hear you mention them trying to prevent Ukrainians from leaving. Let's talk about what more potentially can be done and the international response. We saw President Zelensky make a passionate plea yesterday to European leaders about joining the European Union, about getting more assistance. He's also urging NATO countries to impose a no-fly zone to stop the Russian Air Force. So far, we haven't seen any action on either of those things. But what do you hope to see in the next few days? And could NATO and the EU be doing more?
Well, with respect to a no-fly zone, it's worth talking about that very briefly. That's not going to happen because it means that it's going to have to be enforced. And enforcement means that NATO airplanes will engage with Russian airplanes, and that's absolutely not going to happen. But the West can do a lot more in two respects. The first, further sanctions need to be imposed. We and the rest of our allies we've been dabbling a little bit in restrictions, but they need to be much greater restrictions on all of Russia. And the second thing is we better get moving, resupplying Ukraine with anti-aircraft weapons, anti-tank weapons, and ammunition and food. Otherwise, the Ukrainian army is not going to be able to resist at all.
All right, Colonel Jack Jacobs, always great to have your analysis. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
The crisis in Ukraine was front and center during President Biden's State of the Union address last night in Washington.
Yeah, it started focused on the crisis, and then the president turned to the future of his domestic agenda.
Joining us now to break down the State of the Union is NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Peter Alexander and NBC News Capitol Hill Correspondent Ali Vitale. Good morning to both of you. Peter, let's start with you. President Biden accused Putin of unleashing violence and chaos in Ukraine. What more did the president say about his plan to address the crisis, and what about it was new?
Well, the president, I think, emphasized that the U.S. is now closer alongside its NATO allies than it has been in decades. He says that the crippling economic sanctions are really painting a bad picture for Moscow, for Vladimir Putin, putting him further into a corner and making the economic situation get worse as days pass. As for what he said that was new here, he focused on a couple things, including a new restriction for all Russian aircraft that travel into U.S. airspace, and another plan going forward. Here's part of what the president said last night.
The United States Department of Justice is assembling a dedicated task force to go after the crimes of the Russian oligarchs. We're joining with European allies to find and seize their yachts, their luxury apartments, their private jets. We're coming for your ill-begotten gains. And tonight, I'm announcing that we will join our allies in closing off American airspace to all Russian flights, further isolating Russia and adding additional squeeze on their economy.
The president forcefully condemned Vladimir Putin, saying this is Putin's war, saying it is premeditated, totally unprovoked, and a mistake of historic proportions. He said that Putin effectively had miscalculated here. I think, though, for some of the president's critics, those who wanted a bit more on this issue, the speech was as much a state of Ukraine as it was a state of the union. He didn't really explain why Americans should care about this issue in the details that some may have wanted. Nonetheless, he did view this as the most unifying message, not just for the country, but for the world right now, and one that he wanted to hit home.
Yeah, and Peter, such a good point there about not explaining it because of the repercussions that we feel at home and making people understand why we're going to have to go through that in order to help this country and why we're in this fight and what it means to us. Peter, you just touched on this with Putin. Ali, let's bring you in here and talk a little bit more about what President Biden did have to say specifically about President Putin.
Yeah, Savannah, effectively saying that Putin miscalculated if he expected the U.S. and its Western allies to not be aligned against him. Listen to how he put it last night in the chamber.
Putin's latest attack on Ukraine was premeditated and totally unprovoked. He rejected repeated efforts at diplomacy. He thought the West and NATO wouldn't respond. He thought he could divide us at home, in this chamber, in this nation. He thought he could divide us in Europe as well. But Putin was wrong.
Look, calling Putin wrong there in the same room where the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States was a guest of the First Lady, Jill Biden, standing in that chamber. We saw her as one of the central figures there last night. But there are two pieces to this, too. You guys are talking, I think rightly so, about how he wasn't selling this conflict to Americans in terms of why they should care about what's happening in Ukraine. But what he did do, I thought quite diligently, was make clear that U.S. forces were not going to be fighting on the ground in Ukraine. He talked instead about bolstering and standing with our NATO allies. Of course, that has been the centerpiece of Biden and the administration's response, one that many lawmakers on the Hill, when I talked to them in the halls of Congress, that's a response and a strategy that they have praised repeatedly from the White House. I do think the other thing here, as he laid out a few of those new metrics of what the United States is going to do to further isolate Russia, things like announcing that task force to go after oligarchs for the yachts and the paintings, that's something that Senator Lindsey Graham has been talking about for about 2 weeks now. So as Congress now starts to figure out what its potential role could be, voting on roughly $6 billion of aid that will go to Ukraine, both military and humanitarian in nature, and a supplemental. That's a piece of this, but there are also other things that Congress has been responding to over the course of the last few weeks. That task force for oligarchs, just one of them.
Peter, the president had to make that tough turn, talk about his domestic agenda, talking about everything from the pandemic to the impact inflation is having on the economy. It sort of always feels like a list when they're doing that. Did he have a main message here?
I think the president was trying to sort of use the unity that he was seeing in the room. There was more bipartisan applause than we've seen perhaps in a couple decades following 9/11 there last night, trying to bring that unity and to hope that he could transfer it to some of the presidential priorities to the domestic agenda back home. You know, the one phrase you didn't hear all night was build back better, that stalled agenda that is basically running roadblocks left and right on Capitol Hill, including among Democrats. The president trying to refocus on those ideas and to demonstrate some empathy, that he understands how Americans are being hit right now by historic inflation with gas prices, to say nothing else of all the other prices that have gone up in goods and products that Americans are buying right now, and to try to reemphasize ways that he can help bring, not just so much bring down the cost, but give people a better ability to deal with it, child care, elder care, and beyond. Here's part of what we heard from the president.
It's time for America to get back to work and fill our great downtowns again with people. People working from home can feel safe and begin to return to their offices. We're doing that here in the federal government. The vast majority of federal workers will once again work in person. Our schools are open. Let's keep it that way. Our kids need to be in school.
So the president there trying to deliver a message that Americans could really get around, including one that was an effort to bring his party more toward the middle, saying no longer defund the police, as some progressive Democrats have, but fund the police. Joe and Savannah.
Yeah, that was a big moment. Ali, quickly before we let you go, we know the president's taken this message on the road. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amplification season now, not just for the president, but also for his vice president and members of his cabinet. Vice President Kamala Harris going to North Carolina today to a community college. That's one of the policy priorities Biden mentioned last night, a personal preference and favorite of his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, herself a teacher at a community college, and Biden himself going to Superior, Wisconsin. He'll be talking at a bridge there, again, underscoring infrastructure, one of the key pieces of legislation his administration through Congress was able to pass, even as last night was sort of build back sorta, as in the words of some of our friends at Punchbowl News this morning. All of the policy priorities that we saw last year kind of crumble at the finish line in December. They were under the Build Back Better headline. Now they're just standalone priorities like the child tax credit, paid leave, all the things that Peter just mentioned in that speech last night.
Build back sorta. That's good. All right, Allie and Peter, thank you so much. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.